This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Hello everybody, we've got a great Critical Thought for you today. Before we get going, you have less than a day left for any last minute Patreon donations for the month of January. We're less than halfway to our goal of $100 for our first big, upgrade, which will be more PlayStation coverage thanks to PlayStation Now and a Let's Play of Ninja Gaiden Sigma. So if you're interested, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. You can find it under Game Wisdom or GW Bycer, and let me know what you think about it. For today's Critical Thought, we're returning to the topic of hard games. Specifically, when is it considered too hard? And for every challenging game out there, from FTL, Let It Die, Soulsborne, and so on, there's always going to be critics on both sides. People who find these games difficult to the point of being unfair, and those who find it, it's perfectly fine and the problem is with the player. And this leads to one of those big philosophical debates as to when is a game considered too hard for its own good? And we all have different measures of it. For me, I found games like Soulsborne, God Hand, Ninja Gaiden Black to be well or fair in that regard. But then I had trouble with games like La Mulana, Let It Die, and even something like FTL in terms of its final boss design. And for each of us, I'm sure we all have different measures for when a game goes beyond just being challenging and just becomes frustratingly hard to play. For those of you watching, do you have any examples for yourself of games that you just found for one reason or another to be, too hard and you threw up the red flag or the white flag? And for me, when I think about games that are considered too hard, it has to do with what you're asking the player to do and what you are essentially, asking or putting in front of the player. For instance, if you give the player a pistol and send them into a field against nothing but snipers, rocket launcher troops, and minigun guys, yes, that's going to be on the hard side, but it's not really a fair challenge, or it's not really a challenge, it's just more like a massacre. Then on the other point, we have games that, especially those from the older eras, the retro side, that just throw in, death traps that you'll never see coming, and the only way to know about it is to basically spring it and get killed. And a really good example of that over recently would be something like 1001 Spikes, which basically requires pretty much a perfect run on each stage to even have a chance at getting through it. Now, with a game like La Mulana, for instance, I had trouble with this simply because of it didn't really seem to provide enough information on how to proceed. This was a game that went with old school in the form of committed jumping, you die, you lose all progress from your save, but most importantly, in terms of hiding objects and secrets. This is a game where you'll find something on this part of the map that can only be accessed by something over here, but there's no clue or reference to it. And if there is one, it is so hidden underneath the game's lore or some of the items you need to find that it's very hard to know what you're looking for. And for me, I just found it to be too frustrating to really deal with. For me, I guess one of the big, factors for a game is too hard is if it's not providing me with any real measurement of improvement or understanding it. For instance, when I play a game like Bloodborne, Ninja Gaiden Black, or anything like that, it's about learning the pacing or the rhythm of the game. Speaking of which, here's an interesting point I'm curious about. With Nihon coming out in about a week or so, I'm wondering how that game's going to be received, especially by the Soulsborne fanbase. The game is very challenging and it has a different pacing compared to the other action games that came before it. It feels faster than Dark Souls, but slower than something like Ninja Gaiden, and especially considering this is from Team Ninja, the makers of course, the Ninja Gaiden series. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that to see how well it does in terms of review scores. But in games like this, it's about the player improving. If you know that if an enemy hits you, it's because you didn't react fast enough, or maybe you didn't realize that this combo was a 3-string combo instead of a 2. These are things that can be improved on. These are ways for the player to grow and learn. But when the difficulty is either completely out of your control, which I'll talk about in a second, or there's just no real measurement of improvement or ways for the player to understand what's going on, I find that to be frustrating. As an example of a game that really skirted that line would be something like Fury from last year. Fury is a game that's all about skill progression, and it's all one-on-one boss fights built around learning the boss's patterns, using your limited tools to get through it, and of course surviving the shmup sections. And because this game is entirely focused on skill progression, if you get stuck at a fight, there's literally nothing else you can do other than getting better at the game. But if you've reached your limits, then the game is done. And that's another interesting game that's been brought up in debates in terms of whether or not it's too hard for its own good. And when you get to this point where the player has no idea how to proceed, there's just nothing, I guess, guiding them, either through organic level design or a progression model, it just feels like you're just hitting your head against the wall until something breaks, essentially. And with La Mulana, I actually got pretty far in the game. It's kind of hard to tell in that screenshot, but when I got stuck at it, I looked at things on YouTube in terms of what I missed, and the people who were playing it, they found secrets and stuff that I had no idea they were even there. You had walls, so there was no discernible factor if they were breakable or not. And it's one of those cases where I would have never have solved this game if I didn't have to resort to a strategy guide or a walkthrough. And as I've said before on earlier Critical Thoughts, that's unfortunately not an example of good game design in my opinion. Now, the other point is when the odds are just too stacked against the player. And this is where we get a little bit more on the philosophical side. There was a book I read in college about the concept of player-centric design. And what it meant was a governing philosophy about designing your game in a way that you're essentially guiding the player through it. The player should be able to finish your game because you provide them with the means to do so. You're not going to essentially, I guess, deliberately stop the player, by designing a section that's just brutally difficult, a boss that will block everything except for one specific attack. Basically, you're going into the design with the notion that you intend for every player to finish your game. And I do have some problems with that, and that could actually be another critical thought. But with the topic at hand, with something like Let It Die, Let It Die's challenge came in the form of essentially how the mechanics were balanced against the player in a sense. And what it had to do was with how animations work. Once you start swinging your weapon or any weapon in the game, you are locked into essentially the animation. You push the button 3 times, you're going to be locked into that 3-hit animation. And if one hit connects during that animation, the next 2 hits will connect as well, simply because the enemy or the player is not able to respond in between the animation breaks. So, punch, punch, and that break between the 2 punches, you won't be able to respond. So what ends up happening in the game is if you get the first hit on an enemy, you're guaranteed the second and third hits. And if you're using a strong enough weapon, that can usually kill an enemy or yourself in 1 hit. But then this also raises the issue with multiple enemies attacking you. Anyone who's played a Soulsborne title knows that any more than 1 enemy at a time and things get very challenging. But the Soul series gives you enough means to get around this or adapt. You can dodge out of the way and try to funnel them. You can switch to a wider weapon or attack with a wider swing to try and catch 2 or more guys. In Let It Die, the issue is you get hit 1 time, punch, punch, punch. You're stuck for those 3 hits. But let's say enemy number 2 also starts attacking. Now you're locked into hits 4 through 6. And again, there's nothing you can do. You basically just get stuck into this loop. And now, of course, there is friendly fire. Enemies can't hurt themselves, but this just can lead to situations where one hit will cost you the entire run. And when games get to this point where it feels like the game is just actively against me, in a sense, that there's just no means to counter it, either by design or by the controls or whatever, I just find that too frustrating, and I usually just stop playing those games. I mean, I've played games like God Hand, Ninja Gaiden Black, and the Soulsborne series, and found them, even with their little quirks, to get through it to some extent. But it's always fun, because no matter what game you reference, people will always say it's not enough. I remember when I said that I found La Mulana too difficult because I played Dark Souls, and the guy, when I play like Dark Souls, and someone said, well, Dark Souls, no, that doesn't count, that doesn't mean anything. And then with the Let It Die article, I said, well, I finished Bloodborne and God Hand. Those games don't count. What are you thinking? So you're kind of stuck in a lose-lose position in these cases. But let's wrap things up here, I think, for today. So there really isn't a summary at this point, because for every game out there, there will always be people who will not be able to get through it. And like I said, there is definitely that philosophy debate about how hard should a game be? At what point do things become unfair for your player base? Even if players get through it, and as we know, there are always going to be hardcore fans who will, when does the difficulty hurt a game? And this is a very interesting topic because of the fact that Demon's Souls was kind of like this renaissance of hard games. When it was released, it inspired a lot of developers and proved that there was a market for games that didn't hold your hand, that weren't player-centric. And what do you think about that? For those of you who are enthusiasts or developers, do you follow a player-centric mindset? Do you think every game should be designed with the intent that people should be able to beat it? Or do you think that you should have challenge and force people to step up to it? And if they can't, then unfortunately they won't be able to get through the game. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for critical thoughts or any video games or stuff for me to cover here, please let me know. For the next dissecting design, I'm thinking about doing the Binding of Isaac, another favorite of mine. But like I said, if there's any games, good or bad, you would like to suggest, let me know in any of the comments. Otherwise, that is going to do it. Be sure to check out the Patreon campaign if you would like to get any last minute supports, and check out those rewards and let me know what you think. And be sure to check back daily here, as well as on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games for more great topics. But anyway, I'm Josh Bycer. Have a great night, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.